You are listening to the Keep the Weight Off podcast with Dr. Angela, episode number 88.
Welcome to the Keep the Weight Off podcast, where we bust all the dieting myths and discover not just how to lose weight, but more importantly, how to keep it off. We go way beyond the food, and we use science and psychology to give you strategies that work. And now your host, Dr. Angela Zechmann.
All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the podcast this week. Hey, Marshall. How are you doing today?
Good. Hey, everyone.
It's kind of an icky, blustery day out.
It is.
I'm glad we're inside.
Yeah, it's one of those days to just light some candles and stay inside.
Yeah, I agree. So we had a recent question about sweeteners in the Facebook group. So just so everybody remembers, the Facebook group is called Sugar and Flour Busters Society. And so if you haven't joined Sugar and Flour Busters Society on Facebook, please do that because we can support you in that way. And it's free. It's not like I'm charging you to be in that Sugar and Flour Busters Society. So somebody asked a really good question about, like, are sweeteners okay? And they specifically had a product that they had found, which I'll talk about later, that had a sweetener in it. And you know, when somebody asks a really good question like this, I do give an answer, but then I oftentimes like to come to the podcast and give a more thorough answer and discuss the science behind my answer. And Marshall, we get this question all the time.
I'm so glad that we're talking about this because, yeah, we get these kinds of questions all the time, and there's no simple answer.
Yeah.
So I'm so glad that we're taking the opportunity to talk about this today. It's great.
Yeah. So that's just it. Like when it comes to sweeteners, it's really hard to give a black and white answer on this one. So I would never say use all you want, and I'd never say absolutely no. So the purpose of this podcast is just to educate you a little bit about artificial sweeteners, and then you can make your own decision about whether you want to use them, which one do you think you might want to use, and if so, how much of that do you want to use? So I'm just going to give you like lots of science here and lots of really good information. So get ready. You ready for a science ride, Marshall?
Yeah, I know how I feel about artificial sweeteners. I mean, when I see sugar-free, it makes me cringe because I always think bad aftertaste.
That's interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's the first thing I think of.
Well, let's talk first about the different types of artificial sweeteners that are available. And I'm talking about what's available in the United States. I'm not sure that all of these different types of sweeteners are available in other places, but the most common ones that you'll see in the States. And actually, not all of the sweeteners are artificial. Some, like stevia, are made from natural substances. So a term that we oftentimes see a lot in the scientific literature is non-nutritive sweetener, or NNS. Okay. So if you ever hear me use the word NNS, that's what I'm talking about. And what this means is that it's a substance that tastes sweet, but it doesn't have any calories, or it might have a few calories, but nothing like sugar. And it doesn't really provide any energy that the body can use. Okay. So the first type that I want to talk about is called Splenda. And the scientific name for that is sucralose. And this is the one that comes in the yellow packets. And it's also in a lot of diet sodas that are labeled zero, like Coke Zero or Sprite Zero. And sucralose is one of the most commonly consumed synthetic sweeteners. I actually like it a lot because I think it tastes a lot like sugar and it doesn't have that icky aftertaste that you mentioned, Marshall.
Yeah. Good to know.
Good to know. And you can use it at higher heat, so you can bake with it if you want to. The interesting thing about it is it's present in over 4,500 products, and it accounts for 62% of the $1.146 billion global artificial sweetener market. Can you believe that?
That is incredible. I had no idea.
People are using sweeteners like crazy, which, what that means is that they're using sugar and they're trying to not use sugar.
Yep.
So that just tells you how
That's exactly what it means.
Sugar use is. So that's one of them. The next one is called aspartame, or equal. And that one comes in the blue packets. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. And then there's saccharin, which is marketed as Sweet and Low here in the States, and it comes in the pink packets. And then there's, I don't even know if I can say that, acesulfame. Acesulfame? You know, I almost had a chemistry degree, and I still can't say it. Acesulfame K, or they call it ACE K. And it's called Sunette or Sweet One here in the States. And it's not really popular in packets, at least not in the United States, but it's used more commercially.
Yeah, I've never heard of it.
Yeah, ACE K. It's in a lot of commercial products. There are other artificial sweeteners out there, but those are the most common ones that you're going to find in little packets. And then there's stevia, which is, like I said, it's a natural plant leaf. And what they do is they purify it and then they pulverize it and they make it into a powder, or they put it in drops that you can put in food.
It's pretty cool. I grew some stevia last year.
Did you? Did you ever taste the stevia leaf?
Yes. And you can put it in tea. Like, so if I was going to pick something, I think you and I have talked about this before because I've asked you about artificial sweeteners. And I think that I settled on the stevia. If I was going to use something, I would use stevia. Now, it's really super sweet though. So you got to be careful.
Yeah. Yeah. A little leaf in your tea, not a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
So other types of sweeteners are sugar alcohols like mannitol or sorbitol or erythritol or xylitol. Now, they all have OL at the end of their name, right? So they're sugar alcohols. And these actually do get processed and they will raise your blood sugar, but it occurs much more slowly than sugar. So their glycemic index is lower and they're often not counted, even though they should be, because they do raise your blood sugar and they do result in an insulin response. So you should be counting them in your carbohydrate intake because they require insulin for processing. And one thing I will say about sugar alcohols is that you have to be really careful with them because if you eat too much, it can cause terrible gas and bloating and digestive upset.
I have learned that the hard way. It is true. You have to be super careful.
Well, and the gas can be really smelly too.
Oh my gosh, I've had such a bad experience on eating that crap.
Yeah.
I thought that I could eat. I don't know if you guys have, you probably heard of, like the diet candy that they sell, at the pharmacy. I can't remember. It's like, what is Stouffer's or
Stouffer's,
what is it?
Yeah, I think it is.
So I thought, okay, when I first started this journey, I was like, okay, well, I can eat the diet candy. And so I would go get some and I would eat like 3 or 4 pieces and I would get so sick to my stomach from it. And I learned the hard way. So be careful with that stuff.
Yeah. And I do want to just point out one thing that the pharmacy knows exactly what they're doing. They have all of these diabetics going back to the pharmacy to get their diabetes medications. And there is the sugar, the sweetener.
The diabetic candy.
The diabetic candy right on your way
and
to the pharmacy.
And it's right in the aisle. Yeah, it's right. So you go back to the pharmacy to get your medication and then you go up to the checkout stand to pay for it. And along that walk, that's where all the diabetic candy is at. It gets me every time. Thank goodness I'm not diabetic. But I have gone to the pharmacy and pick up some antibiotics, and on my way to the, that's how I got that stuff. Is I was like, oh my gosh, diet candy, I could totally have this. But no, I stay away from it now. It messed my stomach up.
Well, those marketers are wise, though. So again, just be aware of what the food marketers are doing. I want my podcast listeners to be on it when it comes to food marketing tactics, and that's one of them. All right. I've got one more sweetener to talk about, I think, and that is monk fruit. So this is kind of a new kid on the block. It's really popular among people who are doing keto diets.
Oh, yeah. I see it all the time on TikTok. They use it a lot in the keto recipes.
So this is actually a fruit from China, and it has a sugar in it that's 250 times sweeter than sugar. So they get the substance out of it, they purify it, they make it into a powder, and a little bit goes a long way. So in the US, it's considered safe, but in Europe, it's classified as a novel food, and it's not yet approved as safe. So I don't even know if our European listeners are able to get monk fruit, but I just want you to know that the jury's kind of still out, at least in Europe, as to whether or not it's safe. So keep that in mind.
I was unaware of that. All right.
Yeah, keep that in mind if you're considering monk fruit as a sweetener. And so there are other sweeteners out there, but so I don't want to pretend that this is a complete list of all the sweeteners that are out there, but these are the most common ones. There are some sweeteners on the market that are combinations. So for example, Truvia. Have you heard of that one?
I have seen that. I'm not sure if I've eaten it. I mean, I probably have. I don't know.
It's a combination of stevia and erythritol. So sometimes they like to put the two together and hopefully make it taste better and no aftertaste, all that kind of stuff. So the question that we always get asked is, are sweeteners okay? Can I have a diet soda? Can I have Splenda in my coffee? Can I make baked goods with Truvia? Will any of this set me back? Right? And the answer is, there ain't no simple answer to this question.
Yeah, that's the $1 million question.
There's a lot of controversy if you go and you look at the medical literature. So I just kind of wanted to get you up to speed with what the literature is showing, and then you can make your own decisions. So for example, there's evidence that if you replace sugar-sweetened beverages like Coke, for example, with Diet Coke or Coke Zero, people will lose weight and have an easier time keeping it off. So the thinking here is that if you're someone who drinks, like, let's say 6 12-ounce cans of Coke a day, and we have plenty of patients who come in drinking that much, that's for each can of Coke, that's 140 calories and 39 grams of sugar. And so if you multiply that by 6, you have a total daily calorie intake just from your Coke of 840 calories. 234 grams of sugar you're ingesting every day. And really, this is not that uncommon and pretty shocking, wouldn't you say?
I thought it would be more, actually. I am
really?
a little bit shocked. Yeah, I thought it would be a lot higher in the calories and the grams of sugar. Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. Well,
still not
I don't know.
good. Yeah.
I think, drinking sodas all day, that's a lot of calories.
Yeah, it's super bad. And you're spiking your poor pancreas.
Your poor pancreas.
That poor pancreas again.
Yeah.
It keeps coming up, that poor little guy.
The beta stress. Right. Remember, the beta cells of the pancreas have to produce all that insulin, so you're stressing them out. So we don't want beta stress around here. We want beta bliss.
No. Right.
Okay. So in this case, using a non-nutritive sweetener, and NNS, whichever one you pick, makes a lot of sense. Because what's going to happen? You're not going to be getting all those calories. You're not going to be getting all that sugar. And I can pretty much guarantee that when you stop doing that, you're going to lose weight. Okay, so when you stop having all the calories and sugar. Okay, so 840 less calories a day, a whole lot less stress on the pancreas, you're going to lose weight. So in this case, it makes sense. Now, there is research showing that using sweeteners can cause problems for people. So I want to talk a little bit about that. There's evidence that when the sweet taste buds on the tongue are stimulated, some insulin gets released in preparation for a blood sugar rise. And this is known as the cephalic insulin response. Can you remember that? Cephalic insulin response. So it's thought that the sweet taste will cause a rise in insulin even though there's no sugar to digest, which can be problematic for those of us who are trying to reduce our insulin levels. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Yeah. I'll also say that there's some very interesting research that's being done on the cephalic insulin response and how it works. And there's some evidence that it's not working correctly in people with obesity. But this research, from what I could gather, it's still in its infancy. So just be aware of that. In terms of research on problems with sweeteners, there's other evidence, and this is from a 2014 study out of Israel and a 2018 study out of Australia that showed that sweeteners can kill the good bacteria in our gut. So have you heard of the bacteria in our gut, Marshall?
Yes, I have.
It's called the microbiome. And so science is really coming to understand the importance of a well-balanced microbiome in our gut and how important it is that the different types of gut bacteria are in balance. So you don't want to have more of one type than another. You don't want to have weird types in there. So these bacteria are always working really, really hard, and they're pre-digesting food for us. And they're our first line of defense against chemicals and infectious agents that could harm us. So they're super, super important. There's evidence that the microbiome in people with obesity is different and less healthy than the microbiome in people without obesity, which is fascinating. They have actually talked about using fecal transplants to help treat obesity, if you can imagine that.
I've totally heard of that.
Yeah. Not exactly what I would want to do to treat obesity, but
No,
it's,
heck no.
A lot of people are willing to try almost anything. So,
Yeah. No, thanks.
But there is evidence that sweeteners can kill off the good bacteria and change the makeup of the microbiome to our detriment. Okay? So this is all really interesting. What I will say is that these studies have not been well replicated. So anytime when you think about science, one study does not mean much. It has to be a study that can be replicated, meaning other people have done the same kinds of experiments and come up with the same conclusions. So you need to have a body of evidence before you actually can make any real conclusions. And the thing about the microbiome is that, yes, there is evidence, but it's really hard to replicate that evidence. And it's really hard to validate that the same thing is occurring in humans as occurs in test tubes or as occurs in mice. So nobody's really sure if this is valid. And if so, what's the significance of it? So just be aware of that. The microbiome studies are super interesting, though.
Just the fact that it's called, just the synthetic part of it just scares the shit out of me. I don't know about anybody else, but
what,
just the fact that it's just synthetic sweeteners. Yes.
Yeah.
It scares me.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even need any proof of anything. Just that it's synthetic just scares me.
Yeah. Yeah. So I also, as I was preparing for this, I read a really interesting French study that just came out in March of 2022 this year that showed a correlation between sweetener use and increased risk for cancer. So again, this is one study, but we've all heard about the correlation between aspartame and cancer in mice. Do you remember all of that? It was like in the 70s and 80s. Maybe you were too young. I don't know. Do you remember that, Marcia?
I've heard some. Yeah, I've heard some feedback on the.
Yeah.
I pronounce it aspartame. I've been pronouncing it like that forever. So
yeah, aspartame. That's
fine.
Tomato.
But yeah, I've heard some stuff about it.
Yeah. So those studies were sort of debunked, those old studies, because they were feeding mice like really large amounts of aspartame and like more than any person would ever ingest. And so they said, in small amounts, you don't have to worry about it causing cancer in people. So this was an interesting study because this is it's a population-based study in France, meaning they had 100,000 people and they followed them up for 7 years. And they quizzed them about what they were eating, and they documented what they were eating. And they found that a high consumption of artificial sweeteners, particularly aspartame and ACE-K, was associated with an increased risk of cancer. Now, this is an association or a correlation, not any proof of causation. But I will say that the researchers did a really good job in this study of controlling for confounding factors like age, or sex, or education, or physical activity, or smoking, anything that could also be affecting your cancer risk. All kinds of different types of confounders. So they did try to control for all of those other potential things that could also cause cancer. And I will also say that the cancer risk that they discovered was relatively small. And again, this is an observational study. It does not prove cause and effect. So I just want you all to keep all of this in mind as you're weighing the risks and the benefits of using sweeteners. Okay? Now, here's something else interesting. About a year ago, in a medical journal called Endocrine Practices, 2 experts did what's called a point-counterpoint, looking at the evidence for benefit versus the harm of sweeteners. So this was fascinating to read because it's like, here's my opinion, and then here's the counter opinion. It's sort of like, we're voting right now in the U.S. And so have you ever read the voters pamphlets? Like, here's what we think, here's the opposing position, So that's kind of what this was when it comes to sweeteners. And so I just really want everyone to understand, like, not everything in medicine is cut and dried. And there can be quite a bit of controversy about all kinds of subjects and questions. And the idea of whether you should be using sweeteners or not is no different. So the author of the point, the person who was concerned about sweeteners, was an endocrinologist, and her name is Elena, I have no idea how to say her last name, Christophides, and she's from Columbus, Ohio. And she argued that artificial sweeteners can cause problems for people with obesity, especially in terms of the neurological and hormonal regulation of satiety. So that's a lot of big words. So what that means is in terms of how your body senses fullness. And also, she was concerned about the regulation of body weight and the regulation of energy use. So she's looking at the evidence and saying, hey, you know what, sweeteners can really screw all of this up. And especially in people with obesity, it messes up our sense of satiety. It messes up the way our brain regulates our body weight. It messes up the way our brain regulates our energy use. And she noted that the only studies that showed either no harm or benefit were funded by large food and beverage corporations, or were done for only a very short period of time. So she said in this article, she's like, we have got to stop thinking just about the calories, because one of the reasons why people want to use sweeteners is because they don't want all the calories that are in sugar, right? And so she's like, we've got to stop thinking just about calories and remember that the body's a lot more complex than that. So Marshall, this is a woman after my own heart, right?
I know, right? I was going to say bingo.
I'm always trying to get people to stop focusing so much on calories in and calories out and start focusing on how their body is metabolizing foods. So Dr. Christophides, if I'm saying her name correctly, was particularly concerned about the long-term use of sweeteners and the evidence that shows damage to particularly the sensation of fullness in people who are using sweeteners chronically. So what this means is that if you're someone who's using sweeteners for many years, this can affect your sense of fullness from a biological, biochemical perspective. Does that make sense, Marshall?
Yeah, that's pretty intense just to think about that. So I've always thought, when you're full of food, that just means you're going to feel full. And if you're empty, then you're going to feel empty. But I didn't realize that even if that can mess that up. That's
like there are
crazy.
hormonal signals coming from the gut to the brain that indicate whether or not, telling your brain whether you're full or not. And so she's saying that sweeteners can mess that up. And that's what we see in obesity, So the long-term use of sweeteners can mess that up. So that's the point. Now then we have the counterpoint, which was an endocrinologist named Dr. Carl Nadalski. I hope I'm saying his name correctly. And he practices in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And he's like, listen, she's looking at observational studies. Let's look at studies where they actually took real people and did interventions on them. So he looked at the interventional trials where you're actually experimenting on people. So one group gets their usual fare and another group gets the sweeteners instead. He's like, these are much better studies. So, the sweeteners might include diet sodas. They might include meal replacements that use sweeteners, those kinds of things. And he found that these studies definitely do show a marked benefit in terms of weight loss and in terms of keeping the weight off. Now, he does mention that there's always variability among individuals, but he feels that to make a blanket statement that sweeteners are bad, and especially this idea that diet sodas could be worse than sugary beverages, which is really what he was trying to say, like he's like, you guys are crazy, like diet sodas are definitely better than sugar beverages. So there's no scientific basis that diet sodas could ever be worse than sugary beverages. So just be aware of that. It's all very interesting, isn't it?
Sodas are just bad for you, period. I mean, let's just get that out there on the table.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yeah.
So, all right. So do you have any questions about anything I've said so far?
No, I think this is fascinating information.
Yeah. So you're probably wondering, what would my advice be? here's what I think. Definitely do not drink sugar-sweetened beverages ever. If you have to have a soda, drink a diet soda. But I would be super careful with sweeteners. We just still don't have enough information about their safety and their long-term effects. I think the occasional Splenda in your coffee and the occasional sweetened protein drink is probably okay. The occasional diet soda is probably okay. It's all about moderation. If you're drinking 5 or 6 Coke Zeros every day, this could be a problem. And it's so interesting because whenever I'm with my sister Connie, have you met Connie?
No, I've heard about her though.
Yeah. But this is what we do. Like this is what Connie and I do. We just go to the store and we get cases of Coke Zero and limes. And we just drink Coke Zero and lime and almost no water. So luckily I don't live with her. So this is not a regular habit for me, but I can certainly see how it could become habit forming. I also just want to mention that for some people, sweeteners will trigger a dopamine release in the brain. And this can create cravings for more later. There's actually not a lot of research on this. This is just something that we notice sort of anecdotally. And I know that I'm one of those people. So
I was going to say I can give a personal testimony. That's true because that's what happens to me.
You're one of those people
when I'm doing no sweets at all. And then even if I, do one of the artificial sweeteners, then I start craving sugar. Again. Yeah. And then I have to fight that whole craving off again until it's out of my system. So it's like, why even put yourself through it?
Exactly. Did you know that during the year 2003, I was sugar-free? I went completely sugar-free for 2003. But was there ever a day that I didn't have sweets? My brain could not imagine not having that sweet taste. So during that entire year, there was not a day that went by that I didn't have something that was sweetened with a sugar substitute. Interesting, huh?
Yeah.
Did I achieve peace around food using sugar substitutes? No, absolutely not. For me, it's just been really interesting because I have hardly any sugar substitutes now, and I don't have that sweet taste much at all. Like, I'm not perfect, but for the most part, my brain doesn't want food for any reason other than to nourish my body. And as a matter of fact, just last night, I was struggling to stop and eat dinner. Like, I knew I needed to eat and it was pleasurable to eat, but other things just seemed more important. So that's what can happen. Like, if you're someone who struggles with obesity and food is a big deal, like it was for me for so many years, and you can't imagine not eating, like, that's a really strange place to be. Like, do I even really want to, like, I know I should probably eat. My body wants food, but I really just don't want to stop what I'm doing and go eat, So it's a good place to be. It's peaceful about food. And so when I'm using sweeteners, I don't have that peace. I don't have that desire not to have it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes total sense. And you guys, she really does eat like this because I've been watching her for 5 years. And so that's goals for me. Hopefully someday I can get there. I struggle. I'm still struggling.
Well, I just have my food ready, It's great.
Yeah.
Now, there's one more thing I want to mention. The original poster in Sugar and Flour Buster Society was curious about a product called Orca Spice Chai Tea Powder. Okay. I think with the name Orca, this is probably something that's only available in the Pacific Northwest where we see orcas frequently. But I don't really know for sure if it might be available in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. But this product is labeled sugar-free, but its first ingredient is maltodextrin. So I'm not exactly sure how something that has maltodextrin in it can be labeled sugar-free, because maltodextrin has a glycemic index higher than sugar. And personally, I find myself craving things that have maltodextrin in them. And I believe that many people are sensitive to this particular industrial ingredient. So I would not consider maltodextrin to be any kind of sugar substitute. And I would encourage all of us to be on the lookout for foods containing maltodextrin, because I think it's a problem.
With this ingredient. So one of my coworkers, Gabi, she she and I were talking about this the other day because we were talking about like the Atkins protein bars and, like the, just whatever snacks that you can have if you're, dieting. And so we were just kind of, calling out these different, brands of, protein bars and such and snacks. And yeah, in so many of them, that was the first ingredient. And we were going to ask you about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like what, if it was okay to have or not. So this is, I'm so glad that you brought this up. I'll be able to tell her when I get back to work.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's crazy because, I mean, think about that. Like let that soak in for a second. If that's the truth and that's being used as a weight loss for weight loss snacking, I mean, they're just keeping you hooked on it because you're not going to, I mean, if it has like, what did you say? A glycemic index higher than sugar, then it's definitely not helping.
You know what that means is that it gets into your system and raises your blood sugar faster than table sugar would. That's what that means.
This is crazy. Yeah. So
for
just take into consideration
diet food, unquote.
Yes. Yeah. Like, you guys know what I'm talking about. There's a whole section, in the grocery store of these bars and snacks and, and protein drinks and whatnots. And so that's why my coworker and I were just kind of like looking through, because we were trying to find a protein drink, that was acceptable, to drink that, wasn't full of chemicals and crap, and that is almost impossible to find. It's very, very hard to find that.
Yeah.
And, that has, the right kind of protein and, and all this, there's so much to consider. But, but this, in so many of them, that was like the number one ingredient. So that is so crazy that's just blows my mind.
Yeah.
Man, you gotta watch out. You gotta know what you're doing.
So buyer beware. Any food or beverage that's labeled sugar-free or diet or makes you think it's healthy for you. I have no idea who's watching over the food labeling in this country. There's a lot of stuff that's being sold under false pretenses. And again, our food industry has the upper hand politically. So it's up to you to not let yourself be bamboozled by the food industry. Okay. So if you find that a particular food or beverage really lights you up, this means it's providing a dopamine hit, whether it has actual sugar in it or not. And you'll never be able to achieve peace around food unless you're willing to give that up. Okay.
It's the truth.
You have to make a decision, Okay, everyone. I hope this information has been helpful. The bottom line with sweeteners is that we really just don't know the long-term effects, and the use of sweeteners is controversial. What I want for all of my listeners is for you to have peace around food. If you discover that you crave anything, check the ingredients list and find out what the sweetener is, and just know that that particular sweetener causes problems for you. And then you get to make your own decision about whether you want to keep torturing yourself with that food or not. I find that for me, avoiding things that trigger cravings is just a lot easier than constantly trying to fight myself. So there you have it.
Yeah. In conclusion, just stay away from it altogether.
If it's triggering cravings for you, I would just stay away from it. Makes sense, right? But you get to make that decision. So
definitely.
All right, everyone. That's all for this week, and we will talk again next week. Hope you have a great week and take care. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody.
Hey, if you really want to lose weight and keep it off for good, your next step is to sign up for Dr. Angela's free weight loss course, where you're going to learn everything you need to get started on your weight loss journey the right way. Just head over to journeybeyondweightloss.com/free course to sign up. Also, it would be awesome if you could take a few moments and write a review on iTunes. Thanks, and we'll see you in Journey Beyond Weight Loss.